All right, so this is going to be the first PowerPoint lecture for Chapter 7. The title of the PowerPoint lecture is Sectionalism and Expansion, American History, Unit 4, Lecture 1. Sectionalism. So the first half of the 19th century is marked by a growth of sectionalism in the United States. We have been talking about sectionalism, but I haven't really necessarily given it a name. We've been talking about the differences between the North and the South. We even talked about the differences between the northern colonies, the middle colonies, and the southern colonies when they were under British rule. So now, finally, we can actually put a name to this division between the country. And the name that historians give that is called sectionalism. Sectionalism is placing regional interests above the interests of the country. So people in the north at this time, they aren't worried about the farmers in the south. They're only worried about their businesses, their textile mills, commerce, and trade in the north. They're just worried about that. Same thing with the south. The southerners are only worried about growing crops, selling crops, and farming and agriculture. And that's where we see the growth of this sectionalism. Industry grows in the north. So in the early 1800s, there is an industrial revolution. You should have learned about a little bit about that in world history. The Industrial Revolution does begin in Britain, in Europe first, okay? Then it reaches the United States a little bit later. One of the things that made it possible was this thing called interchangeable parts, okay? And what interchangeable parts are is you could use the same part, okay, could be made for a clock, whether it is a wheel or a device or a screw or a levy. Something that is made for the clock could also be used to make a gun, okay? So we have these interchangeable parts in these products, okay? We also see Eli Whitney becomes an inventor, and we'll talk about him here in a little bit. And we see mass production begins, meaning before the Industrial Revolution, if you wanted a clock, you would have to go to a clockmaker and ask him or her to make you a clock, okay? And then they would make it special for you. But now, as we see clockmakers and factories, they're not just making one or two, they're making hundreds and thousands, and we see this mass production of goods start to develop. All right, so northern industry and agriculture. So the Industrial Revolution grows in the New England states, okay, in New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, okay, and specifically the Lowell system is where these textile mills start to pop up in Lowell, Massachusetts, and this is the first in the United States, and this was the first place in the United States to mechanize all aspects of the textile industry. And it is the beginning of the end of the cottage industry. So I will try to explain very quickly what this means. So, for example, if a textile mill or a plant is trying to make a t-shirt, okay, and all the things that go into making a t-shirt, cutting the t-shirt out of the fabric, dyeing the t-shirt, sewing the t-shirt together, okay? All of those things are done under one roof. In the cottage industry, that is a little bit of the opposite. The cottage industry is where one person would specialize in one certain area of making that product. I'll stick with the t-shirt. One person would be in charge of cutting out the t-shirt. When he or she is done cutting out the t-shirt, he or she would send those cutouts of those t-shirts to somebody who would then sew the t-shirts together. Okay? Then that person would then move the t-shirt to the place where it gets tie-dyed, or the color gets dyed into the t-shirt. Okay? So that's what the cottage industry is where one individual person does one specific thing. Underneath one roof in the Lowell system, as far as talking about textiles, everything is happening under one roof, okay? I did talk about Agriculture in the north, especially in the northern colonies, previously in this class, same thing goes. There is agriculture and farming in the north, although it is less labor intensive and on a smaller scale as compared to the south. Okay, the south has those big plantations like we've talked about, and that is still true in this time period of American history that we're talking about. So, let's talk about Southern agriculture. We talked about Eli Whitney. So Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin in 1793 changes Southern agriculture. So here's a picture of his cotton gin. So what does his cotton gin allow for? It allows for a faster processing of cotton, okay? The types of cotton that was grown in the South in this time, the cotton had a lot of seeds in them, in the actual cotton balls, as you see there on the left-hand side of the picture. What the cotton gin did was it manipulated those cotton balls and it would siphon out those seeds. And then the clean cotton would go through on the other side. Okay? So how does this impact slavery? Well, up until 1793, slavery was actually on the decline in the United States. But because of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, the importance of slavery and slave labor increased because they could process this cotton faster in the cotton gin, meaning they needed the slave labor to pick the cotton faster in the field and get it to the cotton gin. Okay? Beforehand, there was really no big rush because it took a while for the cotton to be cleaned. But now, they can process it faster, so they needed more intense slave labor to get the cotton from the fields to the cotton gin. All right, so let's talk about the North versus South. This is the sectionalism which we're talking about in this chapter. So in the North, we see the growth of industry, businesses, commerce, trade. There are some laborers and some very small farms in the North, okay? The North is also pro-tariff. If you don't know what a tariff is a tax on an import and an export. Okay, and I'll explain here a little bit. There is a growing anti-slavery feeling in the North. People are against slavery, and that is definitely being spread throughout the North. We see mill and factory owners, they're at the top of society, meaning they are the high class of society. They make the most money in the North, and that's kind of who dominates the classes in the northern states during this time. The South sees the growth of slavery because of the cotton gin. There are a lot of farmers, there are a lot of large plantations, and the South is anti-tariff. They are anti-tariff because they don't want to have to pay a tax on this cotton that they are going to try to sell to other countries. So they don't like tariffs, okay? The North, on the other hand, does like tariffs, okay? There is a growing pro-slavery movement in the South as well, and at the top of society in the South are the plantation owners or the very large land-owning farmers. The American system. So the American system was this thing that was conjured up by a man named Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. So, like I've stated before, the country is growing west, okay, and the country is growing apart due to these issues that I just talked about on the last slide. These sectional issues. The American system was the name that was given to try to unite the country economically, okay? And like I said previously, the big supporters of the American system was Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, and I'll go into more detail here on the next slide about what exactly the American system was. So, how did the American system work? So the American system worked by a couple of ways. High tariffs, so a lot of taxes, are used to pay for transportation improvements, including bridges, canals, and roads. So those taxes and those tariffs that were being put on not only the South, but actually on some imports coming from other countries. Other countries, if they wanted to bring their manufactured goods or sell them to people in the United States, they would have to pay a tariff. And they would use, and what the government is trying to say is they're going to use these tariffs or this money to help put back into the country to rebuild some bridges, canals, and roads, all right? Especially bridges, canals, and roads moving west. So what would this lead to? Well, good transportation, okay, would lead to industrial growth, meaning the South and the West can now cheaply transport their raw materials like lumber, like cotton, to the North and to the East, where they would turn those raw materials into manufactured goods. Okay, they would turn that cotton into clothes or into rugs or into drapery. So um, that's what they were trying to promote with this American system. And then in turn, these manufactured goods could then be cheaply shipped back to the South and to the West. Okay, so if you have this good transportation, if you have good roads, good canals, good bridges, then this flow of raw materials and manufactured materials would be easier. And they also wanted to reestablish the national bank to make trade easier. So the national bank actually kind of went out of commission for a few years, but they wanted to kickstart the national bank back up again within this American system. So, what are some things that occurred because of the American system, or what was the results of the American system? We see a national road that was constructed that went from Maryland all the way west to Illinois. Okay, first national road. You might think of them as now turnpikes. Okay, so if you hear the word turnpike or expressway, these started off as main roads, back in the 1800s. The term turnpike was actually these roads, just like you go through a toll booth up in Virginia or over in Raleigh or Charlotte. There would be a person where you have to pay money to, and then the pike would be like the gate would swing up and down and allow you to pass on the road, but you obviously would have to pay before you use the road. The Erie Canal was created in 1825. The canal links the Atlantic Ocean to the Great Lakes, and it was the first of many canals, and it's still in use today. A canal to think of that was built around here would be the Dismal Swamp Canal. The Erie Canal was much larger and wider and deeper than what we think of the Dismal Swamp Canal today, but same type of thought went into it, of just transporting goods and people back and forth. And also we see a picture here of the Conestoga wagon. They begin heading west, and people start to settle and try to expand west. And this was all because of the Louisiana Purchase, and westward movement has started already. And soon we will talk about the railroad, and the railroad will be headed west as well.